You may have heard developers switching to this new coding agent harness called Pi, which is a minimal and extensible way to work with coding agents that you might prefer to Claude Code, Codex, or even Open Code. There's a lot of reasons why, but I'm going to zero in on one feature for managing conversation history, which is called slashtree. I'm going to compare it to how you might manage conversations in Claude Code or Codex, and talk about why this is honestly just a better way to work with agents. Now, I have my terminal pulled up here with a Codex conversation. Everything I say will also be applicable to Claude Code, by the way. So this was more of an exploratory prompt where I was trying to set up an end-to-end testing solution so that when my agent's working on a desktop app, it can actually check its work. So I just asked a question on how to do this. And the way that I hold Codex is in a very lazy way. I don't use planning mode. I don't save architecture documents. I just have a long conversation about what I want to build. And then if we arrive at a point that feels buildable, I just ask it to go implement whatever we're doing. So that's what I did here. We came back with a couple options. It gave me what it thinks is the best step-by-step solution. And then I just went with its recommendation to implement this CLI package that we're trying to build. And it reached something that worked pretty well. It also verified how the solution works. But I realized through reading the implementation that it might be a lot simpler if we built it as an MCP server instead of what I was using here, which is an extension. So I thought to myself, well, how do I go back to the previous plan that we built and try to explore that other option? Well, there are a few ways that you can do this. The first option is to just talk to the agent directly. Actually, I'm not sure I agree with this implementation. It might be simpler as an MCP server. Can you go explore that? And this works well enough, but you end up with the problem of context pollution. I don't really want it to know everything that it did with the Pi extension. I just want it to start fresh and explore a new solution. So now I could reach for something called forking. This is available in every major harness. Claude Code has branch, in Codex it's called /fork, and the mechanics are very simple. It takes whatever you're currently talking about, it forks it over to a new copy, so that way you still have this thread that you can go revisit at any time, but now we have a new thread where we can work on a separate solution. This also gives me the freedom to go over to a new work tree and work inside of this forked version of the conversation. This works well enough, but it still doesn't solve some of the fundamental issues I mentioned. First off, we can't do anything with the context when we fork. It just kind of copies it all over wholesale. Ideally, I would roll back to where we were discussing the planning document earlier, which is up here, and start the conversation from this point rather than wherever we currently were. And really the only way to achieve that is to be very defensive while you're prompting with an agent and trying to predict, will this be a point that I need to fork in the future? So if I had been super smart and upfront, I would have saved this to a separate markdown file, or at this point I would have run /fork so that way I can create multiple threads on the conversation and work on it that way. But that requires a lot of upfront thinking. I prefer to just prompt through a solution, and if I realize I need to roll back a few steps and start over, I just have some sort of mechanism in order to do that. As you can imagine, this is where Pi comes into the picture. So here I have another conversation I was working on with the Pi agent earlier, and let's say I wanted to do the same sort of thing. I want to roll back a few prompts in the past to wherever we were deciding on an architecture doc. And we had a fork in the road of multiple options we wanted to explore. If I want to roll back to that fork in the road, I can do so using /tree. This is a bit like fork, but deciding where you want to fork from. So you can see here, you have access to every column response that is in the conversation, down to the tool calls as well. And you can go through all of them individually. You can also use the left and right arrows to page through. And we can see here right at the top of this conversation is when we worked on our initial architecture plan. And if I want to roll all the way back to here and then explore a new solution, I can just select this inside of the tree, with an option to summarize as well. So if you want to compact all of the context or add a custom prompt describing this solution didn't work and now we want to explore a new one, for example, you can do all of that. I personally just leave it on no summary and then roll back to this point. And if you roll back to a specific prompt, it will also place whatever prompt you wrote at that point in time straight in the prompt box. It's literally a wayback machine for your agents. And here I decided to roll back to the agent's response to that architecture doc and describe a new direction that I want to go down. And then you can just continue on with the agent from this point. Now, another beautiful thing about Tree is it doesn't rewrite your history whenever you want to resume from a previous point. If we look at the tree that's created, we can actually see all the branching that has happened in this conversation. So we can see here where we got our initial architecture document. We can see where we branched off to describe a new direction. And we can see the original thread that we had going. So we can literally create forks in the road in the past. So that way we don't lose any of the progress that we made. All of the history is preserved. This is really powerful because you don't have to plan out when you save architecture diagrams or when you're going to fork off and explore different options. You can just move forward as far as you want to go and then branch off later. It's kind of the Grug brain approach. Another cool aspect is how you can roll back to tool calls as well as agent prompts. I've started using this whenever I need to debug sort of the meta behavior of an agent, like when it makes a tool call that's confusing. Maybe it was trying to do a curl and I realized, oh, we don't have the web search extension installed. Let me go set that up. Or in this conversation, where it reached for my create work tree skill, and it created a work tree off of a directory that I did not expect. I could start a new conversation and ask about it, but I realized I could also use slashtree and roll back to a specific tool call that I thought was problematic. This is the one that surprised me, so I can click into that, and I can ask the agent why it decided to make that tool call at this fork in the road. Why did we create a work tree off of the other working directory? I would expect this to create a work tree off of the main branch always. Update the skill if we need to. In many ways, this is similar to how you would use /side or /btw in Codex or Claude Code, where you have a question that's unrelated to your main chat thread, but you still want to bring in as much context as possible from that main chat thread so the agent can answer that question. Here the agent patched its skill file to always branch off of main, and now I can go back to the main conversation that I was having. So I can just hit the arrow key a couple times, move ahead, and now I'm back to the main thread. So I invite you to try out Pi and see how it works. Also shout out the Warp terminal as being a nice place to try this out. That's the terminal I've been using for this example. It gives you a few affordances to make Pi easier to work with, like a built-in voice mode that's powered by WhisperFlow. It's totally free. And also a code review panel so you can see what the agent worked on, with a way to leave comments to the agent as well and send them back to Pi and have it keep iterating. All sorts of little stuff that makes these coding agents easier to work with when you're inside the terminal. With that, drop a like if it was useful and subscribe because I'm going to be talking a lot more about coding agents. See you in the next video.